Hello, super readers and writers. This is Miss Lee, your second grade teacher, ready to rock and roll with you through literacy today. Before we get started, please make sure to have a nicely sharpened pencil and a notebook. Today we are going to read 3 poems from the collection Stitchin' and Pullin' a Gee's Bend Quilt. We want to see how baby girl changes throughout the poems. As we read, I want you to think about what she's like and what she learns based on the poems. Then we will think about what we've learned after reading the poems. Remember, in this unit, we are learning about how communities change over time. Fortunately for us, we get a peek inside these communities through baby girl's eyes. Every day, baby girl listens, watches, and waits until she's called to sit at the quilting frame. Piece by piece, she not only tells her story as she grows up, but the stories of her family, the stories of Gee's Bend, and the stories of justice and freedom that her ancestors struggled to attain. She tells these stories through a series of poems. I want you to listen carefully to how I read the poems, and then I want you to practice reading them afterwards. You will hear me reading with the flow, and sometimes my voice might go up and down. That means I'm reading with expression. Let's read poem number 1 titled Pinky. Pinky. Back in the 1960s, Mr. Willie Quill broke horses for the Alabama State Mounted Patrol. Fine horses, well trained. Mr. Willie Quill knew his horses. Wait a minute, did he say he broke horses? This actually means that he trains them so that they handle people riding them. You can see the context clue here that says they are trained. Oftentimes when you're not sure of the word, you can look before and after the word to find clues. He knew Jimmy Lee Jackson too, a young man from Marion who was shot because he wanted to vote. We decided to protest the senseless killing by marching from Selma to the Capitol in Montgomery, remembers Mr. Willie Quill. The 54-mile march began in Selma at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. 600 of us stood on the bridge ready to march, but the governor said no, we couldn't. We walked anyway. Midway the bridge, the mounted troopers attacked. Now we're seeing the word mounted here for the second time. Mounted troopers. What do you picture when you hear this? I picture the troops on horses because I know Mr. Willie Quill helped train horses for the Alabama State Mounted Patrol. So this must mean that the troopers were riding on the horse. So they must be on top of the horse. I remember seeing those horses heading straight into us. We held hands and prayed. Beating hooves pound against the blacktop and nightsticks hum as the troopers swing them like lassos. Mr. Willie Quill braces for death, but not today, not Bloody Sunday. Mercifully, he sees one of his horses. I throwed up my arm and hollered, "Pinky!" The horse broke stride and veered away, allowing Mr. Willie Quill to live, to tell the story. I want us to take a look right here where it says nightsticks hum. I wonder what that means. Could the sticks be humming a tune? In poetry, poets express themselves in creative ways. Instead of saying that these troopers swung their sticks around, she's allowing us to experience what it must have sounded like. When you swing something heavy in the air, like in the movies, they make a humming sound. That's probably why she said it this way, so we can feel like we're actually there. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel like I'm there. Mr. Willie Quill broke horses for the Alabama State Mounted Patrol. Fine horses, well trained. Ask anybody. Mr. Willie Quill knew his horses. Thank goodness Pinky knew him. Before we move on to the second poem, let's think about what baby girl's like and what she learns. Great readers and writers go back to the text to find evidence, so let's see what we can find. This poem proves that she learned a lot, so let's underline some evidence. She learned that people organized a march after seeing so many senseless killings. Where can we find evidence for that? Let's look at the second stanza. I'm going to underline this quote by Mr. Willie Quill. We decided to protest the senseless killing by marching from Selma to the Capitol of Montgomery, remembers Mr. Willie Quill. There you have it. There's one piece of evidence to prove she learned something. Can we find another one? She also learned about how Mr. Willie Quill was brave and didn't give up. Let's take a look at the 5th stanza. I'm going to underline, Mr. Willie Quill braces for death, meaning he gets ready for death, but not today. This proves that he was brave and fought for himself. As a result of his bravery, he was able to survive to tell his story. If I think about how baby girls probably like here, I think she was probably scared but empowered at the same time. I say this because if I were there, the humming of the sticks would have scared me, but seeing Mr. Willie Quill get saved by Pinky, that would have made me feel empowered to find hope even in scary situations. Let's read poem number 2, titled, Dr. King Brings Hope. Dr. King brings hope. I stitch a patch of bright pink to remember Pinky's story. Next to it, I sew a spotless white patch for the hope Dr. Martin Luther King brought to the Bend. I've only read about Dr. King. Grandma saw him, heard him, marched with him. On a stormy February night in 1965, Dr. King spoke at Pleasant Grove Baptist Church. Grandma, with Mama in her arms, was among the first to arrive. Every pew was soon filled. People stood, some even stood outside in the rain. With misty eyes, Grandma says, "The words we heard that night changed our lives. Peace, hope, justice, equality, truth, love, freedom." I would have followed him anywhere. And she did. What do you think a pew is? Let's reread that sentence. Every pew was soon filled. People stood, some even stood outside in the rain. Well, if there are people standing both inside and outside of the church and there's nowhere to sit, the people in the pews must be sitting. So a pew is probably something you sit on, like the benches inside of a church. Now, just like we did with the first poem, let's think about what baby girl's like and what she learns. This poem proves that she learned a lot, so let's underline some evidence. I want you to try to find the clue, so as you can see here, I numbered the lines in the poem so you don't have to underline them. Which line or lines gives us evidence that she learned something? Pause this video and think about what she learned and then write the lines down in your notebook. For example, I think line 5 and 6 prove that she learned Dr. King gave people hope. So in my notebook, I would write, Dr. King brings hope, because that's the title of the poem, and then write lines 5 and 6. Now let's read our last poem, number 3, The Right to Vote. Do you notice how reading these poems in order kind of gives us a bigger picture of what the 1960s were like? Let's see what baby girl learns in this poem. The Right to Vote. Folks from Gee's Bend crossed the river to Camden, Alabama to register to vote. The next week or so, they shut down the ferry. Though the ferry is open today, it wasn't then. The official reason was no money to keep it running. Grandma recalls that time. Sure as I tell you, was done to keep us from voting. Instead of a 20-minute ferry ride, the only way to get from Gee's Bend to Camden was to make the 50-mile trip by car or walk. I would have crawled to vote. Grandma's voice is strong. I believe her. Wow, what a poem, especially the ending. I would have crawled to vote. This tells me that Grandma would have done anything to vote. Let's think about what baby girl is like in this poem and what she learns. Just like we did in the last poem, I want you to write down the lines that prove what she's like and what she's learned. Please pause this video to reread and take a deeper look into the poem. Keep your notes safe so that we can continue this conversation during the live class. In the meantime, I'd like for you to go to Google Classroom and check the latest Flipgrid activity for extra credit. Here are the directions.
Today, we are going to hold a Flipgrid Poetry Slam. And the way that works is, 1, you're going to practice reading the 3 poems, Pinky, Dr. King Brings Hope, and The Right to Vote. After practicing, when you're ready, you can click on the Flipgrid Record button and record yourself reading the 3 poems. after you're done with your poems, I want you to go listen to 2 other classmates read their poems and then give them feedback on the comments below. Okay, have fun!